it seemed like a perfect way to bring them in today. So, Keith Getty, thank you for joining us once again here on Point of View.
Thank you so much, and it's just an honor to be in the show.
It is an honor to have you.
And happy Reformation Day to you.
Yes, happy Reformation Day to you as well. And we certainly will welcome your phone calls as we go along here. But I know, first of all, that you and Kristen both wanted to really focus on the 500th anniversary. First of all, as a chance to launch Sing, which is an initiative really that begins with the conference in Nashville and then, of course, is continuing through this year. But explain a little bit more about that, because this is one way for our listeners to connect up with you in a very significant way.
That's right. The whole initiative is to try and get churches around the world to turn this question back to congregational singing. Church music has become in many ways big business. It's certainly been one of the most controversial buttons in the last 30 years of church life here in America, and so little of it has been about the congregation singing, and that was Luther's vision that he reinstated, having been gone for 300 years. God's people have always sung together, Old Testament, New Testament, and throughout the church fathers. And as Luther studied Old Testament, New Testament, and church history, he kept saying that this was the common connect, and so for 300 years it disappeared, and he reinstated it. And so we felt he really has inspired so much of my life from a view of teaching the Bible through the songs that we sing, to the love of the importance of the congregation singing, to actually just a huge love for music and the arts. And so obviously our first hymn was In Christ Alone, which is very much his battle cry. And then we felt last year it's time to refocus people again in congregational singing on how it affects every part of life, our own personal lives, our families' lives, our church's lives, and our community's life. And so that really began this adventure.
Well, again, let's, if we can, maybe give everybody a little bit of a history lesson. And one of those is the fact that at the time of the Reformation, at the time of the late Middle Ages, as Eric Metaxas pointed out the other day, the Catholic Church had sort of become almost a grotesque caricature of the church. And so congregational singing at that time was even considered a heretical act. So what we take for granted today, although this is disappearing in a lot of churches, I want you to speak to that, but what we take for granted today of congregational singing actually was not just something that was not done, it was considered heresy to do it. True?
That's right. Jan Hus was actually martyred at the stake in Prague for 3 counts of heresy, one of which was daring to let churches sing. So it was extraordinarily controversial at the time. But Luther believed that the reformation of the church was through the preaching and the singing of the word. In other words, people learn the Bible by being taught it, and then they carry it out of church by singing the songs that help them put them into their minds and their memories and their imaginations.
You know, Scripture talks about hearing the Word, and so this is why when I teach in a Sunday school class or Bible fellowship class, I read large portions of Scripture, because that's what it was intended to be read in church. And I would say the other part of that is of course, with your hymns or the hymns, let's pick Charles Wesley and others, you're getting Scripture as well. So there is a sense in which when you're singing, it's not only a worshipful act, it's also hearing the words of God and getting, I think, deeper into your soul. What are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, if you look at the history of singing, even the very first hymn, the Songs of Moses, the Song of Aaron, were actually taught to help people learn their heritage. They understood God, they understood their history, they understood where they came from, they understood their own identity in the songs that they sang. The Psalms did a similar thing, where on this kind of, almost on a canvas, the psalmist is like a painter, painting pictures and images of the God of Scriptures, which were memorized, so that they understood their faith through what they sung. So that was what he understood it, and why so soon after Reformation, Luther started, before he'd even thought of setting up, before he'd even thought in level about ecclesiology, he was saying, let's get back to singing, and let's get songs that help us understand what we believe.
Well, again, that was what was so important at the time, because people were not literate. Many had never read the Scripture, so the only way they would know it is if it was spoken in their language in the church, or if it was sung in their language inside the church. So that was very important, but it's still important today. I would imagine everybody's literate. Everybody has a Bible. Most everybody carries a copy of the Bible on their smartphone. So what's the significance today?
It doesn't change much. I mean, to Luther, it would have been an anathema that you would study the Bible for 45 minutes and then sing a silly song. To him, your faith was carried out on the songs that you sing. And really, literate or not much has really changed. If I went into your Bible study of people who were older and said, how many Bible verses do you know from memorization and how many do you know from songs? You'll find it's a lot more in the songs. If I took the language with which you pray to God and interact with God, you would find there are many more turns of phrase in that come from songs than come from preaching. So it still is the number one way that we internalize how we understand God in our minds, in our memory banks, in our hearts, in our imaginations, and then in our prayers and our conversations.
Very good. Let's take a break. When we come back, we will keep Keith Getty on for a little bit longer, and we have information about him and, of course, the outstanding ministry that he has had over the years. You can click on his picture, and that will take you to gettymusic.com. We also have been talking about Sing the Initiative and, of course, this whole idea of singing. First of all, congregational singing and hymns. I'd like to open up the phones, too, and even while he's still with us, and certainly even after he leaves, your thoughts about are you in your church still singing congregationally, or is that changed where you just sit back and have someone perform from the front? Do you sing the hymns? Is there ever a time in which you take some of those rich hymns and sing them in your church? If you'd like to join us today on Reformation Day, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Today is October 31st, and most people know it as Halloween, but it also has long been known as the Festival of the Dead. The Celtic tribes and their priests, the Druids, celebrated this day as a marker for the change from life to death. November 1st was the beginning of the new year, so Halloween or Samhain was like New Year's Eve. It was both a time of death and new beginnings. The young would wander the countryside disguised in scary masks, carrying turnips carved into scary jack-o'-lanterns to frighten off ghosts and goblins. They believed that the veil between the living and the dead was believed to be the thinnest at this time of year, and therefore one could more readily communicate with a loved one in spirit. I might mention that Deuteronomy 18 warns us not to be involved in any activity that includes divination. The term Halloween is shortened from All Hallows Even, as it was the evening before All Hallows Day, also known as All Saints' Day. Pope Gregory moved the day from May 13th to November 1st. This made Halloween the eve of the celebration. November 1st was All Hallows Mass, and October 31st became All Hallows Even. Today, Halloween has become one of the most celebrated holidays. We're told that people spend more on decorations at Halloween than any other holiday except Christmas. And often the Halloween celebrations have included more and more occultic activity. Christians have two options: to ignore Halloween or to provide an alternative. I might mention that many churches now provide a fall fun festival. So I hope you will think about what you will do today. Don't just go with the flow. Make an informed decision about what you'll do on Halloween. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
On this Reformation Day, wanted to spend some time talking about Martin Luther, and we will do that in the next segment. But still, we have Keith Getty with us as well, talking about the importance of hymns, talking about the importance of congregational singing. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll probably take most of those calls after they leave. But, Keith, I wanted to, again, come back to this idea because Martin Luther really understand that really a vital component of worship and really of the gospel was congregational singing. And it seems to me that when churches have moved away from that, we've missed a very vital aspect of our worship and even our gospel testimony, don't you think?
Oh, for sure. And it's interesting, you know, we did a survey in seminars 3 years ago, and at 13 different events, we asked people, what's the first thing you ask after your church's service on a Sunday about the music? What's the first question? How would you describe it, or somebody else describe the music in the church? And in 13 talks, not one person mentioned the congregation singing. It was all about songs or hymns or the musical style or presentation or the leaders or the personalities or the choir or backing vocals. And all of those things are important, but they're not the main thing. And what it portrays is that most musicians are primarily thinking about their role rather than the service of the body of people on a Sunday morning and the service of God's family. And so I think that's what we're really hoping to challenge this year and encourage people to make it a year for helping your churches sing together better, helping your families in your church sing together better.
One of the things that I'd like to ask maybe just about process for just a minute is it seems to me that in some churches where I've been as a guest speaker or even as an individual that's been in the audience is sometimes the music is so loud that I wonder if that drowns out congregational singing. Have you ever looked at that particular issue?
Well, it's an interesting issue. Obviously, in the Psalms and in Revelation, both books have got evidence of music being very loud and very silent. And so God is a creative God. He's a God of beauty. He's a God of order. He's a God of variety. He's a God of color and a God of interest. So there should be loud and there should be soft. But I think each church have to ask what is helping their people sing better. At a very simple basis, if you play at a normal volume and then you play a little bit louder the next verse, everybody tends to sing a bit louder. But if you keep playing loud all the time, I think the chances are people are most likely just to give up. I think the churches that tend to sing best are churches that can hear themselves sing, and also churches that actually sing in harmony as well. That really does help too. So I think there's definitely a lot to be said for people hearing each other sing. You got to remember as well the language that's used in the New Testament. I'm not an authority on Greek, but what I'm reliably told, having asked multiple times, is it's usually sing to one another, sing with one another, sing praises to one another, sing in spiritual hymns. And these things are it's an interactive experience. It's a horizontal experience as well as a vertical. It's not just a vertical experience, and it's absolutely certainly not just a self-obsessed personal experience. It's something that we share as a family. It is kind of the embodiment of what it is to be family. The picture in heaven is of every tribe, tongue, nation, language, people, of every color, race, point in history, all singing together. And so the kind of the microcosm of that on earth is God's people with all our dysfunctions gathering together on a Sunday to sing. And so the central part of it is the people, not the music. The music acts purely to serve.
Let's, if we can, maybe talk about the book. First of all, I might just mention on the link here, there is also a video. I always encourage, Keith, individuals to watch the video. It's about 1.5 minutes long that talks about the Sing book, and then to hit that share button and put it on their Facebook page, and I guarantee they will start a conversation because this whole issue of worship and music is certainly, as you well know, a hot topic. But talk about that because you and your wife have actually gathered together with others that have talked about why the church should sing, when the church should sing, and how the church can sing. Can you kind of give us a brief overview of what's available?
Sure. Well, obviously the Sing Conference began in 2017, and it'll go on in 18, 19, and 20, and we're really excited about that. So if you want to come to Nashville and hear some incredible musicians and concerts and times of singing, speakers, just have a great time in our cool city, where you'll be very, very welcome to be there with us this year at Music City Centre downtown, the first major church music conference ever to be held at Music City Centre. So we're very excited about that. And then we'll be playing some of the concert halls in Nashville as well, which is really cool. Then, but the other thing was the book. We wrote a book called Sing. It's a simple little book. It takes an hour to read, and it basically goes through why we sing, and then what happens when we sing, and then we've got little bonus tracks with tips at the end. So it begins with why we sing in the first place, because we sing first of all because God has commanded us to. It's an act of obedience. To not sing by logical deduction is disobedience. It reminds us that we're all created to sing, no matter how bad my singing is. And interestingly, my guitar player in my band, Zach, one of my guitar players, Zach, told a great story about his father who couldn't sing in tune, but he loved to sing so much in church that the kids all grew up with a love for singing. So it's really not about ability. It's Christianity makes clear that singing is not about professional ability, but it is about confessional ability. If you will confess that Jesus is Lord, so you sing. And then thirdly, that the good news of Christ, of his death and resurrection, compels us to sing. If we look through history, if we look through the Bible, it says something like, the Lord is my strength and my salvation, whom shall I fear? God is our strength and refuge. And then it goes on and says, I will sing or I will praise. It's how we respond to that. So that's the three main reasons that we sing. And then we look at what it means for us as individuals, then with our families and our marriages and our kids, and then what it looks like in our churches, and then what it looks like in our community. So we're really excited about it.
Again, the subtitle of it is How Worship Transforms Your Life, Your Family, and Your Church. And I would love to have you speak to that for just a minute as well, because, again, when we talk about worship and singing, we think about inside the church building. But I am well aware of families that do, and then other families that never have, sung around the table. And it does seem to me that singing isn't just something you do on Sunday in the church building. Singing is something that you can be doing in your car as you're listening to Keith and Kristen Getty CD or DVD or whatever it might be, or watching it on DVD on your TV, or it can be something around your family devotions. So again, this is much broader than just what happens inside the church building, isn't it?
Absolutely. My wife says that congregational singing is a feast on a Sunday that's prepared during the week, and it's really funny. It was the very first time, one of the first times I met John MacArthur. I was very nervous about meeting John MacArthur, but we're doing a concert in LA, and our kids were just crawling all over each other in a hotel room, misbehaving, and we were just making it one of those days. You're just making a total mess as a parent. You're overreacting, then you're underreacting, then you're not dealing with things. And by the time I got to see him, I was very restless, and I just blurted out to him, any advice on raising kids? And he said, well, after choosing a church, he says the most important thing is to fill your home with songs of the Lord.
Wow. Isn't
and
that
I was
incredible?
not expecting him. I wasn't expecting him to say it. It's interesting. It's always interesting comparing, looking at history and how we've done things in the past, not to worship history or to idolize people who've gone before us, because they're all human. But sometimes we can learn. And the New England Puritans, for example, wouldn't let a man take the Lord's Supper on a Sunday if he wasn't praying and singing with his children every day.
Wow.
And that might even have been an overreach, but either way, it lets us see a huge difference. Their logic was that that's the most important thing he does. That going to work and having friends and looking after your family and organizing social events, being involved in the community are all good things, but they're not the main thing. And so, even for us as church leaders, we have no business writing songs for churches if we're not singing and praying with our kids every day. And so it's something that the Lord desires. It's not to do with standard. The Lord desires all of our abilities. I have 3 daughters, and we teach them hymn every month. And 1 month earlier this year, we were doing Holy, Holy, Holy as their hymn. And so
Sure.
Eliza, my oldest,
Yes.
she's an oldest perfectionist child, so she performs it and does it perfectly and takes a bow and asks us, was it good? And we have to tell her it was the best performance I've ever heard. And her little sister's a little bit more mavericky. And so she rolls her eyes and she performs it and then sticks her tongue out at the end of it and says you shouldn't do that, and doesn't sing it quite as well. Then the little one starts singing Holy, 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 and then she goes, how I wonder what you are, because she gets mixed up with Twinkle, Twinkle. And the point is, point of the matter is, in the same way as I as a dad take equal pleasure in each of them, so no matter where our family are at, the Lord is delighted in our singing. So some people can be the Von Trapps and sing in harmony. Other families can simply take technology, the very technology, ironically, that is ripping marriages apart and ripping children's lives apart and ripping families apart, and actually use that to bring something of Christ and His Word into their family homes every day and put in their memories. You know, the Facing a Task Unfinished project was interesting because as we would meet missionaries, there was a lot of the missionaries became Christians through radical conversion, but all the ones who grew up in Christian home talked about the songs they learned
That's incredible.
before they were teenagers that sustained them, every single one of them. And it's an amazing story how songs. So we want to build up, you know, we live in the most exciting generation to be Christian, but the challenges are greater than ever. And we want to build up deep believers who will thrive and who will change.
Keith Getty with us, and again, talking about the book, Sing. We'll be back with more right after this.
Modern life is go, 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 and Point of View is absolutely ready to go with you. I dare say that most of us have access to either a smartphone or a tablet, maybe even a computer that is app-based. There's a new way to keep up with Kerby and the team, the free Point of View radio app. With quick links to listen to the program live, to keep up and share Kerby's meaty and insightful viewpoints, commentaries, read articles on issues we're talking about that impact you and your family. Did you know you can also watch the show? Yes, radio with cameras. You can access that through the app as well. There's a link to our action alerts, how to find us on the radio across the nation, ways to contact us, and so much more. Visit your app store, iTunes or Google Play. Search for the Point of View radio app. There's no reason not to take us with you. The free Point of View radio app, available now for Apple and Android devices. And when you get it loaded, there's one more button I'd like you to press, the one that says Donate Now. Join Truth Team 360. Support us financially as we support you with the truth that you need. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation today, Reformation Day, 1-800-351-1212. And we had the bottom of the hour break sneak up on us a little bit quickly, and so I wanted to give Keith Getty, who agreed to stay on for just another couple minutes or so, just to, again, talk about some of the resources that are on his website. Again, let me point you to the book Sing. You might be able to find it in your local bookstore, but we have a link to gettymusic.com. There you can find out about the tours, the conferences, the hymns, the projects. Of course, the store is there as well. And I do encourage you to find out a little bit more about the book. Maybe watch that video, which takes about a minute and a half, and then post it on your Facebook page and educate some other people about this issue and start a conversation, which we wanted to start today, about the importance of hymns, the importance of congregational singing on this 500th anniversary of the Reformation. But Keith, for just a minute, talk about some of the resources there, because certainly any worship leader would benefit from the fact that this is kind of the site for modern hymn writers. But all of our listeners that are Christians would benefit from this. So what are some of the resources you might point them to?
Well, the Sing book is there for people to read, but it's also something to read through your leadership in your church. So it's something you get. We encourage you to, if you've got a worship team or even just the elders in your church, to read it like that. But it's also something that congregations can do as well. And there's lots of programs and follow-up so we can give to try and help as churches look at that over the next year. We're encouraging lots of churches, whether it's now, whether it's during the Christmas season, or whether it's starting in January, to really tackle this subject this year.
And one of the things I might mention is that this, as you go to the website, will show you where some of these events are. Of course, I know you're going to be coming right down the road from us on Wednesday, November 1st, and then they can find these in all the various places where we broadcast. So again, you go to the tours section, or also find out a little bit more about maybe bringing you to their particular community, because I know this is an ongoing project where you really want to challenge the church to consider congregational singing. And then also, of course, there is information about the Irish Christmas, which I thought people might enjoy seeing on your website. So again, if they take the time to simply go to our website, pointofview.net, they will find the link, or else they can just go directly to gettymusic.com and find those resources. So thank you for being with us today here on Point of View, and thank you for bringing this very important issue before our congregation and before our audience.
Thank you, sir. Really appreciate the time today. Thank you.
Let's do it again. Let's, if we can, just before we take another break, spend a little bit of time today talking about the Reformation. This is probably a familiar conversation if you think about it. We've had Max McLean on this month. We've had Reg Grant on this month. We've had Dr. Erwin Lutzer on this month. And then we've had in studio with us Eric Metaxas. So we've really had an opportunity to talk about that. But I thought just, again, as a refresher, I might read today from the commentary by Eric Metaxas that appeared in the Wall Street Journal. He entitles it The Real Story of the Reformation. And he says, this week, the world celebrates the 500th anniversary of an event that never happened. Well, something did happen, and it altered the course of history, but what actually took place is astoundingly different from how it is portrayed today. As the story is told, on October 31st, 1517, an Augustinian monk by the name of Martin Luther socked the European church establishment in the kisser, gotta love Eric Metaxas, by defiantly nailing his 95 theses on the indulgences to the door of the Castle Church in Wittenberg, Germany. The thunder of his hammer resounded throughout the world. It was as though he had stuck his finger in the Pope's eye. The document brazenly charged the Catholic Church with corruption. The corrupt powers that be were put on notice that the vile practices of indulgences, whereby the faithful could throw a coin in the coffer to buy their way out of purgatory or worse, must end forever. Except it never happened, at least not that way. Now, I love Eric, but I think he's a little overdone some of that. But nevertheless, let's go through what he has to say. He said Luther probably didn't post his thesis on the famous date celebrated each year, though he likely did within a month of the designated day, and they might never have been posted by Luther, despite 5 centuries of paintings depicting him doing just that. As it happens, he may have handed the document to a church custodian to post, and if Luther did not post it himself, he may have unheroically affixed it with paste. More important, posting the document on the door of the Wittenberg Castle Church was not an act of calculated defiance. That door had long served as the community bulletin board for anything and everything. He says, for context, imagine the fabled document posted next to a flyer for a missing cat. Not sure that was the case, but nevertheless, it was obviously a place where various postings were made because Martin Luther was trying to begin a conversation, even a debate about indulgences, and of course his discovery, he felt, of this idea that the just shall live by faith and the fact that we are saved by grace, not by our works. But Eric Metaxas goes on in his piece to say the most important difference between how most people remember the event and what actually happened is that 30-something monk never dreamed that history would notice what he was doing. He did not intend to be defiant or to cause trouble, and he certainly did not plan to shake the foundations of the church he loved and obediently served. The idea that this all might lead to a sundering of the church was unthinkable. If he had thought of it, he would have been utterly horrified by it, he says. Eric Metaxas goes on to say, and the theses were written in Latin, which no one but cultural elites could understand. If there was anything provocative in what he wrote, it was only because such documents typically contained an edgy thesis or two in the hopes of instigating a robust debate. The brainy Saxon monk merely wanted to coax his fellow theologians into an academic debate on indulgences, thinking that something must be done about the troubling practice through the proper and customary channels. What happened shocked Luther more than anyone. A copy of the document was promptly delivered to Rome, where it furrowed Vatican brows and upset the papal stomach. Far worse, Luther's well-meaning Saxon colleagues quickly translated the document into German. Then they duplicated it endlessly without his permission, courtesy of a relatively new technology invented by a fellow German, Johann Gutenberg. Suddenly, everyone was reading it across Europe and debating its points. Before Luther could say sola scriptura, the horse had slipped out of the barn and was wildly trampling the status quo that had existed for centuries. You know, one of the things we said, even when we were talking with Eric Metaxas, and even some of the other individual discussions and debates we had, is how the Gutenberg printing press really changed everything. Up until that time, because publicity didn't go far and wide, it was very easy for the church, especially at that time, to have really clamped down on those which it called heretics. And so, of course, the rest of what Eric Metaxas points out is the final conclusion of what today we call the Protestant Reformation. He says, within 4 years, Luther's written and oral responses to the growing conflagration had taken the world by storm, and he arguably had become the first genuine celebrity in world history. The frothy torrent of writings that poured from his pen would make printers and publishers rich, with no royalties ever paid to him for his troubles, and his woodcuts portraits reproduced like rabbits across the German landscape. The powerful ideas Luther's writings conveyed would in time lead to virtually everything we now take for granted in the modern world. By prompting the end of Vatican hegemony, Luther opened the door for the creation of thousands of new churches under dozens of denominations, Lutherans among them. And in the coming centuries, this attitude would help elevate the concepts of religious pluralism, tolerance, democracy, and freedom. Who knew? Certainly not Martin Luther, whose grotesque pronouncements against the Jews near the end of his life proved that he simply did not comprehend the ramifications of what he had loosed upon the world. But by humbly raising the questions he had in 1517, and then by responding to the attacks that followed as truthfully and carefully as he could, Luther ended up cracking the great edifice of medieval Christendom in twain, and for good.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
For this Reformation Day, I thought it would be good for just a few minutes to talk about what started the Reformation and then what are some of the impacts of the Reformation. We already talked about Martin Luther, of course, talked about the importance of traditional hymn singing and the rest. But I alluded to that just a minute ago when I was reading from this piece by Eric Metaxas, and that is the idea that what really kind of started this was the 95 Theses, and it had to do with Martin Luther very concerned about these indulgences. And during the Middle Ages, the idea of an indulgence was a way to reduce the amount of punishment that you had to undergo for sin. And so originally it was the idea of what you would do in order to prevent you from having to suffer a great deal, say, in purgatory. But that began to change dramatically as there was a push to raise money for the refurbishing of St. Peter's Basilica. And up until the time of around Martin Luther's life, Germany had banned the selling of indulgences, but that was freed up. And so the individual that probably was the focus of the ire and concern by Martin Luther is a man by the name of Johann Tetzel. And Tetzel would travel around, and one of the phrases that was actually attributed to him, I could say it in the German, but I'll say it in the English, as soon as the gold in the casket rings, the rescued soul to heaven springs. And so he would get in front of individuals and say, don't you want to rescue your relatives who have died and are now suffering in purgatory? It could be an aunt, an uncle, a father, a mother, a grandfather, whatever it might be. And because, especially during the Middle Ages, there are a lot of individuals were not literate. They were ignorant of the Bible and certainly ignorant of Bible truth. It was a time in which superstition was rampant. So doctrines like purgatory certainly could actually be used to keep people in fear. And Tetzel really fed upon those superstitious fears and was able to really convince people that their departed loved ones were actually burning in the flames of purgatory. Would even say, you know, if you ever burned yourself in a fire, well, imagine what they're going through right now. So he convinced them that they should pay money to release them from their torment. Well, that's what finally was, if you will, the last straw for Martin Luther, this corrupt practice of selling indulgences. And so that's why he wrote the 95 Theses. These were really a series of questions and propositions for an upcoming debate. And then the argument is that these were hung on the door announcing this idea of an academic discussion. Now, we have lots of people, whether it's Eric Metaxas and his people on the Wall Street Journal today, or even John Stone Street in Breakpoint, arguing that it's doubtful that he actually hung them on the door. But why do we believe that? Well, it's because Philip Melanchthon said that he posted them on October 31st, 1517. We know that's the date on the letter that he sent, so whether or not he posted them, whether he hammered them there, whether they appeared later on, I guess is sort of insignificant. But I think Eric does a good job of helping us understand that these were more humble and academic in tone. These were not, in your face. This is the idea that he came to the church and nailed them on the door to the church saying, I'm going to really show you. No, this was an attempt to really begin the conversation. And frankly, if you look at the 95 Theses, the first two really had nothing to do with the indulgences and everything to do with what today we would consider basic theology. One was the idea that God intended for believers to engage in repentance, and then also this idea that faith would lead to salvation. And so when you look at these 95 Theses, you can begin to see that what he was doing was questioning some of the teachings that had been part of the Roman Catholic Church. And part of that is due to the fact that in the early part of the 16th century, Martin Luther and some of the theologians around him were beginning to question these beliefs because they had access, first of all, to the Bible in their language and the original text. They also had access to Augustine, who was writing about the primacy of the Bible in terms of determining ultimate religious authority, and also Augustine that believed that human beings could not reach up to God. They could not achieve salvation by their own works. And so this was already contrary to what had been taught at that time during the medieval period by the Catholic Church, that people's salvation was actually brought about by good works, what are oftentimes referred to as works of righteousness. And this is where Luther found himself on the opposite side with the Pope and the ecclesiastical authority of the Catholic Church, because he believed in the primacy of the Bible, and he also believed in this idea of salvation by grace. And so in some respects, what you have are the development of a series of theological propositions which have oftentimes been referred to as the five solas. Talked about this about a week or two ago on the Millennial Roundtable, and Brent will be with us tomorrow, so maybe we'll get into it again. But the first one was sola scriptura, which is Latin for scripture alone. The second is sola fide, which is faith alone. The third is sola gratia, grace alone. And then you had two others that developed over time, solus Christus, Christ alone, which, of course, as we mentioned just a minute ago with Keith Getty, is, of course, perhaps their most famous of all their hymns, In Christ Alone. And then sola Deo Gloria, which is to the glory of God alone. But this idea of Scripture alone is really based upon 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17, this idea that indeed all Scripture is inspired by God and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, for training in righteousness, so that the man of God may be adequate, equipped for every good work. So it is based upon the idea that I will use God's word to determine what is right and wrong, and I will use God's word to determine my theology. Then this idea of sola fide, faith alone, sola gratia, grace alone, is this idea that we are saved by grace, and we are saved through faith. So it is not our good works, because we cannot save ourselves. We cannot do anything that would merit favor before a holy and righteous God. And again, the verse for that, or verses for that, would be Ephesians 2:8 and 9. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not as a result of works, so that no one should boast. And so these are the ideas that are so important in terms of, if you will, Protestant, and really even now Christian theology, because as we've even pointed out, Catholics today will look back sometimes even on what had happened during the Middle Ages and certainly reject some of the ideas that were taught. But as we today find ourselves celebrating the 500th anniversary of the Protestant Reformation, I thought it would be good to not only talk about the individual that brought it about, Martin Luther, and then the other reformers, but some of the legacy even to this day that we enjoy from this idea of sola scriptura, sola gratia, sola fide, solus Christus, sola Deo Gloria. And those are certainly some of the most important elements of what we have inherited in the 21st century from something that began 500 years ago. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to be talking with Chris Cragin-Day. She is a professor of English and theater at the King's College, a graduate of Baylor University as well as Oklahoma Baptist University, and she co-authored with Max McLean Martin Luther on Trial, a play that many of you will get a chance to see, and others I hope will, if you cannot attend the play because it does not come to your community, might be able to watch it later on television or DVD. Let's take a break, though. Reformation Day, and if you'd like to find out more about the things we've been talking about today, it's all available at our website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
Does Point of View make any difference? I think Dr. Eric Walsh would say it does. Dr. Walsh was fired from his job as District Health Director for the state of Georgia, not because of anything he did or failed to do on the job, but because of sermons he preached in his local church. What does that have to do with Point of View? Jeremy Dyes of First Liberty represented Dr. Walsh, and in February, the state of Georgia paid a large settlement for their religious discrimination. And Jeremy Dyes became an attorney specializing in defending religious liberty, greatly because of what he learned listening to Point of View radio as a child. That is the kind of difference you make when you support the Truth Team, but we can't make that difference without your help. Become a partner today in this important mission of speaking truth in love. Join the Truth Team at pointofview.net/team. Choose your giving level, stretch a bit, and please do it today. Or call 800-347-5151. pointofview.net/team. Or 800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
Second hour today, we are continuing our conversation about Martin Luther and about Reformation Day. 500 years ago, the beginning of what many people would call the Protestant Reformation, the posting of the 95 Theses, and again, October 31st, 1517. And again, we've already talked, as we did in the first hour, about Eric Metaxas and others question whether or not they were posted on that day. Philip McLean said that they were, and that's why we're focusing some time and attention on that. And this month, we've done quite a bit to try to emphasize the Reformation and Martin Luther. The first, of course, is we had Max McLean on, and we talked about Martin Luther on trial. We're going to return to that in just a minute. We've also had Reg Grant on talking about his book Storm, which is a story, a fictional story, historical story about Martin Luther. We've had, of course, Erwin Lutzer on and talked about that for some detail. And then, of course, last week we had in studio with us Eric Metaxas and his new book, 480 pages, Martin Luther, as well as in the last hour had a chance to talk with Keith Getty about the importance of music, and that came from Martin Luther and the idea of congregational singing, and also read a piece that appeared in the Wall Street Journal by Eric Metaxas. We're posting that on our website right now in case you'd like to read that. But let's come back to this opportunity for many of you to see the play Martin Luther on Trial. For those of you listening in the Dallas area, you can actually, if you haven't already gotten your tickets, be able to get it this weekend. I know quite a number of people around me here that will be at one of those performances. And we are now going to be talking with an individual who, working with Max McLean, wrote Martin Luther on Trial. Chris Cragin-Day is well known for a number of different plays. Matter of fact, Max McLean was very impressed with her play about Emily Dickinson, but she's had other productions, A Woman, The Unusual Tale of Mary and Joseph's Baby. She and her husband Steve Day are the founding members of Firebone Theater, which produces plays that examine where humans meet the divine. She is alumnus of the Public Theater's Emerging Writers Group, and also holds a bachelor's degree from Oklahoma Baptist University, a master's degree in theater from Baylor University, and is an assistant professor of English and theater at the King's College there in New York City. Chris, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'm very impressed with your credentials and your background, and what little I had a chance at this dinner with Max McLean to see a preview of the play. This seems very fascinating, and so can you set the scene for us? Because in some respects, this is, if you will, the second trial. You have the one trial of Martin Luther and the Diet of Worms. This is sort of a hypothetical trial that takes place outside of space and time, if you will, bringing all sorts of different actors and participants together. But can you explain a little bit more about Martin Luther on Trial?
Sure. The conceit of the play is that the devil is asserting that when Martin Luther passed and stood before God, that God decided to harbor him and allow him to come into heaven despite the very many sins that the devil will put forth as evidence against Martin Luther. And so the idea is that this trial takes place in a location, as you said, that's outside of time and space in a way. That's a great way to put it. And and that God has, for some reason, unbeknownst to the very confused participants, including his wife Katie and St. Peter, allowed this trial to happen.
So again, this is an opportunity to bring a lot of different elements together. There is a sense in which it reminds me a little bit of this idea between heaven and earth, because I've been a fan of the fact that if you look at it, John F. Kennedy and C.S. Lewis and Huxley all died on the same day. And what would happen if those individuals all met? You have, again, the hypothetical. What would happen if you were to bring in, and it looks like, again, you have to tell me because I've only seen the clips. I haven't seen the play yet. But it seems to me that we've got Martin Luther, we've got Katie, we've got the devil, we've got all sorts of other ecclesiastical authorities. And so in some respects, it really gives us a full-orbed look at the life of Martin Luther and also the impact of the Protestant Reformation. Fair?
That's exactly right. And when Max came to me and proposed the idea of commissioning me to write this play, that was really what he wanted. He wanted to look back at the history of this very significant man and the other people that built the Reformation with him, and ask the question, okay, in the hindsight that we have now, 500 years worth of hindsight, what is the context of this man's impact and the way that he affected not just Christianity and religion, but also Western culture in general?
I would love to know for just a few minutes the process, if you don't mind some of the process questions. The first one is, what did you have to read and what did you have to study to begin to understand enough about Martin Luther so that what you had said in the trial, in the play, would be accurate? What kind of background research did you have to do?
Well, that's a great question. And what I found was no matter how much I read, more and more stuff kept getting written. So,
yes, it's like being on a treadmill, isn't it? Yes.
Exactly. He's actually like one of the top 10 historical figures that have had the most written about him. So when I came to the realization that I was never going to be able to catch up to the Luther scholars that have studied him for 20 plus, 25 plus years, I settled on reading as much of Luther's original pieces, essays, as possible, of course, translated into English because I don't speak German. I also read about 8 to 10 biographies about him and a lot of scholarly essays. The Luther scholarship is something that just continues to grow and evolve. And so especially when I got to the questions of like his historical impact in Germany and in Europe, I had to really delve into kind of those more scholarly essays. And then I also went to Germany, and I didn't really do much scholarly research there because, again, I don't speak German, but I just wanted to put my imagination in the actual locations where this story took place. So I went on a bit of a Luther quest in Germany and just visited the different locations of his story. And I felt like that was, that really informed my imagination as well.
One of the things I've said before is if people would like to read more, of course, we mentioned Erwin Lutzer. That not only gives you the context of Martin Luther, but moves before that. So you talk a little bit about Wycliffe and Huss, all the way after Luther, takes you to Zwingli and Calvin and others. And, of course, then this new book, which is 480 pages, so you have to give yourself a little bit of time, by Eric Metaxas on Martin Luther. Those are some Christian books written by that. But, of course, as you said, there is just an enormous amount of scholarship that has been produced over these 500 years about Martin Luther. And so I want to come back and talk a little bit more about how this came about, the revisions and all the other things that are necessary to actually put on a play. And we are privileged to have with us Chris Cragin-Day, and you also have a link to her website, which I would point you to, and that's available on our website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Today is October 31st, and most people know it as Halloween, but it also has long been known as the Festival of the Dead. The Celtic tribes and their priests, the Druids, celebrated this day as a marker for the change from life to death. November 1st was the beginning of the new year, so Halloween or Samhain was like New Year's Eve. It was both a time of death and new beginnings. The young would wander the countryside disguised in scary masks, carrying turnips carved into scary jack-o'-lanterns to frighten off ghosts and goblins. They believed that the veil between the living and the dead was believed to be the thinnest at this time of year, and therefore one could more readily communicate with a loved one in spirit. I might mention that Deuteronomy 18 warns us not to be involved in any activity that includes divination. The term Halloween is shortened from All Hallows Even, as it was the evening before All Hallows Day, also known as All Saints' Day. Pope Gregory moved the day from May 13th to November 1st. This made Halloween the eve of the celebration. November 1st was All Hallows Mass, and October 31st became All Hallows Even. Today, Halloween has become one of the most celebrated holidays. We're told that people spend more on decorations at Halloween than any other holiday except Christmas. And often the Halloween celebrations have included more and more occultic activity. Christians have two options: to ignore Halloween or to provide an alternative. I might mention that many churches now provide a fall fun festival. So I hope you will think about what you will do today. Don't just go with the flow. Make an informed decision about what you'll do on Halloween. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us for a few more minutes Chris Cragin-Day, and she has co-authored this trial of Martin Luther that is a play that is available in a number of places where we broadcast. For our Dallas listeners, that's happening this weekend, and for some of you in Chicago and other places, you can find out. So, again, we have had the link to that, and you can find out more by going to the Fellowship for Performing Arts and find out a little bit more. If you'd like to know about her, we have a link to chriscragin-day.com, and that has information about her blog, her plays, her musical, and we'll talk about some of those in just a minute. But, Chris, if there's one thing I learned from the most recent dinner that I attended with Max McLean for the Fellowship for Performing Arts, this had a write, it had a rewrite, it had another rewrite, it had some tests. Take us through the process for just a minute. For any listeners out there that have maybe not taken a course from you at the King's College on what it takes to actually produce a play, help us understand how long and tedious and difficult it is to finally get to the success that now we're going to be able to see this weekend here in Dallas.
Well, it's always a long process. I guess I shouldn't say always, but usually the development of a play takes anywhere from 1 to possibly 10 years, and sometimes they never come to fruition, you know. But Max has a very meticulous and generous process that he uses, which allows the playwright to write a few drafts, and then he likes to do a lab production, which gives a couple weeks of rehearsal with professional actors and a professional director, and is usually just shown to an invited audience of usually board members and friends. before he ever shows it to a wider audience. And so what that allows a playwright to do is really hone it at every step in the process. And the rehearsal process in particular with professional actors and a director, for me, was just such a crucial part in the development of the play, because I do a lot of rewrites in the rehearsal room, and both Max and our director, Michael Parva, just really encouraged me to follow my impulses in those rewrites in the rehearsal room, and supported that kind of vigorous workout. So it was a very fun and very it was a lot of hard work, but a lot of fun.
I would think so. And some of the rewrites, I assume, are because you get feedback from people saying, I didn't understand what that meant or why you said that, or maybe other cases you were trying to make sure that you were faithful to what they might have said at that time. So there are different reasons for the rewrites, weren't there?
Yes, and also actors can give very, very helpful feedback.
Yes.
In terms of, like, why is my character doing this? How is this consistent with this? So even just the writers and the director and Max and I in the room, even just that is just so helpful.
You know, one of the other things I certainly noticed your influence on is that as we've talked about Martin Luther over this last month, especially when we had Reg Grant, who's a professor at Dallas Seminary, in here, we read one of the pieces about the interaction between Martin Luther and Catherine, where basically she actually asked him to marry. And I have seen at least part of that reconstructed when I went to the dinner with Max McLean. And I know one of the things that you talk about even on your website is how you love stories of strong women. Well, she's a strong woman because in some respects she has rejected all these suitors and finally just, if you will, blurts out, no, the only person I could see myself married to is you, Martin. And right. that kind of gets his attention. Speak to that, because that is really one of the most, again, I've not seen the whole play. I've only seen these various vignettes that people have played. But it sure strikes me as maybe one of the most delightful parts of the play. And I know that you certainly worked hard to make that a very enjoyable part of the play as well.
Yeah, that is probably my favorite scene in the play, and it's actually the scene that I wrote first. The original draft of the play was very different, and that's one of the few scenes that pretty much stayed intact from its original version all through the process. When I started doing research on Martin Luther, I was immediately compelled by Katie and her story, which is just as courageous as his. And so I came to the process wanting to make sure that her story was told as a co-partner with Luther in building the Reformation.
So again, that was just one of those, I'm glad I guessed right, that I thought was probably showing some of your talent as well. Just before I take a break, though, I wanted to talk about the fact that we have posted your website, and there's a blog, there's information about your plays, your musicals, and others. And if you have other listeners that we oftentimes do that are interested in theater, they're interested in the creative process and everything, I really wanted to point them to the website, but talk about when people land on your website, some of the resources that might be available and how people can connect up with you in the future.
Well, sure. I actually also have my musical, which I wrote with Don Chaffer of Waterdeep, is playing in Oklahoma City, so some of your listeners might be interested in that very soon. And so that information is on my website, and that's with River and Rail Theater Company. But I have an agent, here in New York City, and so anyone that's interested in reading any of my work is, welcome to contact me through the website or contact her, and, we'd love to share that. So.
Well, and again, one of the things I saw there is a contact point. So there's an email point. There's some information about the Firebone Theater, which I know you and your husband are part of. Can you share a little bit about that just before we let you go?
Sure. It's Firebone Theater is a small theater company that my husband and I founded together that's interested in stories about where the human intersects with the divine. And so we've been producing in New York City for about the past 10 years, and sometimes my work and sometimes other people's work. And that's actually my musical theater co-writer, Don Schaffer. Our partnership grew out of that theater company.
Well, again, I just appreciate the work that you did to make Martin Luther on Trial a reality. I do want to encourage our listeners to go to the Fellowship of Performing Arts to find out more. Of course, they can just type in Martin Luther on Trial. There are all sorts of various links that we've had on our website, and I would encourage people to attend that and support Christian theater, ones that are well done and have just a great dedication to excellence, but also historical accuracy. And Chris, thank you so very much for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Well, again, I hope you will find out a little bit more about her. We have, again, the link to chriscragin-day.com. There's a dash in there, but you don't have to even remember all of that. You just simply click on her picture where it says see more, and you will have all the information that you need. As we take a break here, I want to come back and maybe talk for just a few minutes about some of the issues in the news. After all, we have an indictment today. Do need to talk about that. Of course, it is Reformation Day, but it's also Halloween. So before it's all through, we will acknowledge that it is also Halloween. But I didn't want to start with that, but I thought maybe it would be good to mention that as well, since that's my commentary today. So all sorts of great resources available to you on the website, pointofview.net. In case you missed the first hour where we talked with Keith Getty, that is something that I thought was very powerful in terms of on the 500th anniversary, I should say, of the Reformation, really a call for the church around the world to rediscover the power and the importance of congregational singing. So that's one issue. We have also posted the article by Eric Metaxas that appeared in the Wall Street Journal. Of course, you can get his book. It is making its way onto the New York Times bestseller list. Martin Luther, 480 pages. You'll learn a lot about not only Martin Luther, but about the medieval period and about Pope Leo and so many other things as well. So that is available on the website as well. And when we come back, we'll talk a little bit about some of these very important issues in the news. Robert Mueller has brought down some indictments, Paul Manafort and Rick Gates, but also a plea agreement with George Papadopoulos, and we'll get into what that might mean as well. But if you'd like to join our conversation at any point, of course, we always open up the phones in this last half hour, 1-800-351-1212. So if you'd like to join us, feel free to do so. If you'd like to sit back and listen, we'll cover some of these important issues as well. Let's take a break, though, and if you are looking for more information about what we've covered today and would like to share that with your friends, neighbors, maybe pastors like to share it with your congregation, it's available at the website, pointofview.net. We'll take a break. We'll be back with more right after this.
Modern life is go, 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 and Point of View is absolutely ready to go with you. I dare say that most of us have access to either a smartphone or a tablet, maybe even a computer that is app-based. There's a new way to keep up with Kirby and the team, the free Point of View radio app. With quick links to listen to the program live, to keep up and share Kirby's meaty and insightful viewpoints, commentaries, read articles on issues we're talking about that impact you and your family. Did you know you can also watch the show? Yes, radio with cameras. You can access that through the app as well. There's a link to our action alerts, how to find us on the radio across the nation, ways to contact us, and so much more. Visit your app store, iTunes or Google Play. Search for the Point of View radio app. There's no reason not to take us with you. The free Point of View radio app, available now for Apple and Android devices. And when you get it loaded, there's one more button I'd like you to press, the one that says Donate Now. Join Truth Team 360. Support us financially as we support you with the truth that you need. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take those calls in just a minute. Just joining us, let me just mention that in the first hour, had a chance to talk with Keith Getty, who again said on the 500th anniversary of the Reformation, he and his wife and others are really calling for the church around the world to rediscover the power of congregational singing. And so that was very powerful. And so if you had not a chance to hear that, we have that available on our website, and especially some of the information about Sing. That is a new book out that I think you will find very helpful. Then we had kind of an educational time in which I read a piece by Eric Metaxas that appeared today in the Wall Street Journal. We've posted that on our website about the truth about the Reformation. And, of course, Eric Metaxas was in studio with us last week as we talked about his book, Martin Luther. And so, again, if you are not familiar with that book, 480 pages, great material there. Then just recently we were talking with Chris Cragin-Day, and she co-authored with Max McLean this play that many of you in the Dallas area will be able to hear this weekend and watch this weekend. Others around the country will be able to see that as well. And so we have information about that as well. So if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. I might get into some of the issues in the news. Of course, we have some indictments coming down by Robert Mueller of Paul Manafort, as well as Rick Gates, his associate, and then a plea agreement with a foreign policy advisor, really somebody more on the periphery, but nevertheless George Papadopoulos. So we'll get into some of that, but let's take some phone calls first. We'll go to North Carolina first. DJ, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hi, Kirby. How you doing?
I'm good. What would you like to share with our audience?
Hi, I told the guy to answer the phone. Just a real quick backstory. I'm a retired Navy chief. I'm a president of a motorcycle ministry, and I'm also a pastor of a biker church. And I got a grandson that's in the 9th grade, and he just told me yesterday he's doing a timeline on Christianity. And his history teacher told him that he couldn't include the resurrection because that wasn't the world view. And so we sat down last night, and I helped him with the report and included the resurrection in the timeline. And he had to present it today, so I'm just kind of waiting to see what happens. I've tried to contact the teacher, and he would never return my call.
Sure. What's your grandson's name? Maybe we'll encourage everybody to pray for him.
You'll laugh at this. His name is Harley Davis.
Well, that's great.
So,
I would encourage our listeners to pray for him. And I appreciate your boldness and his boldness. That's really encouraging.
Well, it kind of fires me up because, like I said, I'm sick of it. It's the way the world is going with our schools and our education. And this is just a single teacher telling a 14-year-old that he can't talk about his religion. That's what the timeline was on your religion. And he's telling me he couldn't put that in because the world didn't accept that view. And I'm almost wanting this to come to something so it can be addressed.
Yes. Well, again, I think you stand in very good stead, as we oftentimes talk about with our good friends from First Liberty. We had an individual in studio with me yesterday in the morning show, and of course we'll have Kelly Shackelford with us in the future, as we always do. There's some great resources about the rights of students on campus. And again, even the Supreme Court, when they struck down mandatory Bible reading, they still said that you can teach about the Bible. Well, how could you teach about the Bible or religion without talking about the fundamental issue? Because what changed the disciples from being scared disciples to Peter on the day of Pentecost and thereafter preaching in Jerusalem about the risen Christ? If the resurrection did not take place, how do you even explain the remarkable change in their lives and all the other issues? So I think you stand in good stead with that, and I appreciate you taking a stand. We lose our religious liberty because we don't stand up for our religious liberty. We lose our Christian heritage because we don't stand up for our Christian heritage. So good for you.
One quick point. They are trying to scare these young children into believing this stuff. So I've already been on First Liberty's website, and I'm already ready to contact them if I need to.
Well, I hope so.
Kirby, and I'm going to listen to you on the radio, buddy.
Thank you. Thank you, DJ, and thank you for your service to this country as well. Let's take a few more phone calls here. I'm going to kind of move through these, so I'm trying not to be abrupt, but at the same time I want to hear your story. Let's go to Tom. As I understand, you come from kind of a German Catholic heritage, and you wanted to speak about the Reformation, so educate us if you might.
Yeah, I never heard of Martin Luther. I grew up, my mother was a hardcore Catholic, and as hard as this is to say, she just died last year. And I tried to lead her to Christ, showing her that salvation was a free gift by grace through faith plus nothing. And she was trusting in the Mass and her baptism and her church attendance. And honestly, this is the God's honest truth. According to my sister, she died screaming in complete terror that she was going to hell. And Roman Catholicism does not give you any assurance of salvation. In fact, if you believe that gospel, you're believing in a perverted gospel, according to Galatians 1. I don't care what TV evangelists like Rick Warren say and Osteen, they were not our brothers in Christ. They are. I feel sorry for them. You know, I know a lot of people that I really admire. I worked for a man, a doctor named, he was a Roman Catholic, and we had long conversations about salvation. But salvation is free, and it's if you follow what Paul says, it says we're going to be judged according to the gospel he preached, and that was the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, without baptism, without church membership, without tongues, without sacraments. It's free today. And the Catholics are teaching primarily Peter's gospel, which was the gospel of works and faith mixed, according to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And if you listen to a Catholic sermon, they're almost always out of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They never touch Paul. But anyway, if you get a chance, brother, go to Alberto, look up Alberto Rivera, Father Alberto Rivera. He's a former Catholic Jesuit priest on YouTube or
I think I've heard the name.
Yeah, look it up and read look at his interviews. It's amazing. He was in the Catholic Church for 27 years under the Pope, and the whole religious system is satanic. And I'm just going to come out and say it. And everything, just about every religion, like Mormonism, Pentecostalism, Jehovah's Witness, Seventh-day Adventists, is interconnected with it. Their daughters are the great whore in the Catholic Church.
I think you're maybe painting with it too broad a brush there, but I want to come back to some of the things that we learned in terms of the Reformation, and that is the solas, as we mentioned a minute ago, sola scriptura. You know, that's one of the things that Martin Luther used when he was at the Diet of Worms, where he says, look, unless you can show me from the scriptures where I have erred, I will not recant. And this is why this was so important. And, of course, as I just pointed out earlier when we talked about this, this is all based upon 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17. And then, of course, as Tom was just pointing out here, in terms of the fact that we're saved by grace, by faith, again, sola fide, sola gratia. And again, that's Ephesians 2, 8, and 9. Ephesians 2, 8, and 9. And so some very important passages there that I would encourage you to read and to memorize and to maybe even share around the table tonight. I know there's going to be a lot of focus in most households about Halloween. Got that, figured that out a long time ago. My commentary today is on Halloween. But one of the things we've tried to do this entire month was to focus on the fact that this is the 500th anniversary of the Reformation. And what actually unfolded has been a schism, because there is, I think, a much clearer view than there's ever been before. Are you saved by works? Are you saved by faith? Can you merit favor before a holy and righteous God? And I think the scriptures are very clear that you cannot, both in the Old and the New Testament. Or can you only accept this free gift of God, and that comes through grace, through faith? And so, again, this is the idea of sola scriptura, sola gratia, sola fide. And, of course, we also talked about one more, solus Christus, and that brings us back to perhaps the most famous of the hymns written by Keith and Kristen Getty, and that is In Christ Alone. And as I was introducing them, I forgot to mention one very important part, and that is it holds the #1 position of the most frequently sung hymns in the churches in the United Kingdom for the last 9 years, and it was voted the #2 best loved hymn of all time. I suspect what first is Amazing Grace. I don't have that on the sheet here, but I suspect that as well. So again, one of the reasons I wanted to talk about that as well is not only it's the theology that we've inherited from the reformers like Martin Luther, John Calvin, John Zwingli, and others, John Knox, go all the way down the list, but also the music. And this is one of the reasons we had Keith Getty on the first hour. If you didn't have a chance to hear it, you can go back and listen to it on the website, pointofview.net, because they are starting with their global conference they just held in Nashville, now a traveling series of conferences in which they really want to challenge the church to come back to the power and importance of congregational singing. And as we pointed out in that first hour interview, really during the time of the Reformation, congregational singing was not only not done, it was considered a heretical act. And so we today don't consider it heresy, but sometimes we simply don't do it. So that's one of the reasons we've covered some of the things we've covered here today on Point of View. When we come back, let me spend just a minute getting into some of the issues in the news. We'll cover more of it tomorrow in our Millennial Roundtable. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Supreme Court has announced that it will hear the appeal of Masterpiece Cake Shop. You are probably familiar with at least the broad outline of the facts. A baker is approached to create a product that communicates a message he has a moral objection to creating. It is, unfortunately, an all too familiar refrain these days. Its threat to religious freedom and the freedom of speech should be obvious. Our Constitution guarantees the rights of free exercise of religion and free speech for every American. By granting review of Masterpiece Cake Shop versus Colorado Civil Rights Commission, the Supreme Court of the United States has indicated that it wants to consider whether the people of faith who operate a business will be welcome to the public square or driven from it. Americans want a diverse public square that tolerates a variety of beliefs and opinions. We hope the Supreme Court will use this opportunity to protect people like First Liberty clients Aaron and Melissa Klein, who have been forced out of business, penalized $135,000, and even had a gag order issued against them, all because the state of Oregon would not tolerate them operating their business according to their religious conscience. No one should lose their livelihood because the government disagrees with their religious beliefs. Let's hope the Supreme Court makes that abundantly clear. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. You can protect your religious freedom by going to firstliberty.org to download your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit. Our attorneys created kits for churches, ministries, Christian schools, military members, students, and teachers, and the workplace. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
After a few more minutes, let me just mention that tomorrow, as a program note, we will have our Millennial Roundtable. Dr. Nick Pitts will be with us. Dr. Brent Taylor will be with us, and this will be an opportunity to look at some of the issues in the news. And for a minute, let me talk about that, and then since it is Halloween, we will acknowledge that. I've spent most of my time today talking about the fact that it's also Reformation Day, but we will acknowledge the other in just a minute. Let's get back to the news, and that is Robert Mueller, as they said in the National Review, has made his first strike. He indicted former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort and his associate Rick Gates. Now, there's also been a plea agreement with a foreign policy advisor, George Papadopoulos. He was in his 30s. I read a little bit more about him, and really seems like he was more on the periphery of the campaign, although some have wondered maybe if he has been willing to plead at least for this plea agreement, agreed that he misstated something or lied about it, I don't know which, and said that it was in terms of when they made the connections to Russia, and actually he brought that in. He was thinking that maybe he could actually represent to Putin how Putin could get together with Trump, and then represented to the Trump people how they could get together with Putin. Well, it never really planned out, but nevertheless, those were the various things that are brought down, 2 indictments and then a plea agreement. So we'll see where that takes us. But let's again get back to the points that are relevant. You keep seeing, and even today, front page of USA Today, it's got all these diagrams and everything making like this is really proves collusion. Really doesn't, if anything, because what it does is say that long before Paul Manafort was even part of the campaign, really between 2006 and 2015, Paul Manafort and Rick Gates worked as lobbyists for a Ukrainian political party, which we talked about yesterday, that was maybe involved in all sorts of things that deserve prosecution, maybe even jail time. Well, we'll leave that to the court to figure that out. But it certainly has nothing to do with the campaign. Paul Manafort joined the campaign, I believe, in March, left it right after the convention in August, in part because of some of the stories that came out in the New York Times. And as the editors of the National Review point out, I'll go down to the 4th paragraph, Manafort's alleged crimes have nothing to do with collusion. The suspicion that the Trump campaign illegally coordinated with the Russians to hack and then publicize Democratic emails. Now, on the other case, George Papadopoulos, he was a low-level foreign policy advisor to the campaign who admitted lying to the FBI about his interactions with unnamed actors who claimed at least to have ties to the Russian government. He tried to set up a meeting between Trump and Vladimir Putin and had repeated contact with a man who informed him that Russia had dirt on Hillary Clinton in the form of thousands of emails. Of course, that was already known at the time, and as they point out, he was kind of a marginal player in the Trump campaign. But all of a sudden, this sort of marginal player now shows up in some of these diagrams. Then they say, on the other hand, this shows that people who purported Kremlin ties wanted to establish a relationship with the Trump campaign, and some officials in the Trump campaign were clearly interested in that possibility. So did collusion take place? No. Was there interest? Sure seems like there was. So that's the first part that we have here, and we'll play this out. What is so intriguing is that Robert Mueller, the independent counsel, is actually accusing Paul Manafort of failing to register as an agent for a foreign government. Now, this is required under the Foreign Agents Restoration Act, called FARA. Now, that is something that really has not been enforced, really, and has never been prosecuted since 1966. So this might be a signal, which I think is a good signal, by the way, from Robert Mueller, that everybody should be filing with that. And, of course, one of those individuals that did not was Tony Podesta. Now, if the name Podesta sounds familiar, you have 2 of the Podesta brothers that have been involved with Hillary Clinton's campaign. And so that's something that is kind of intriguing. And the article I posted yesterday, which we never really were able to get to, by John Fund, points out that, you have this tour that Hillary Clinton is doing based on her book, What Happened. And although she claims her days of running for office are over, he says, some of her close friends say she hopes for a comeback. And that, according to John Fund, is precisely what many Democrats are privately horrified over. And so if nothing else, there is a lot of evidence to suggest that there was not any real collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. But as we've talked about over this last week or so, there seems to be some kind of collusion between the Clinton campaign and especially the Democratic National Committee because of payments that were made to an individual by the name of Steele, as we've talked about before, individual that was a former ex-spy, Christopher Steele. And I did not know this until I read this in John Fund's report. There were 380 payments from the Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee made to the law firm that was hired, that actually hired Christopher Steele. When you talk about 380 payments, it becomes more and more difficult for Hillary Clinton and for all sorts of leaders in the Democratic National Committee to say that they did not know anything about this. So we'll see. And, of course, there's new material coming out in a book we'll talk about later in the week about the fact that within about 24 hours after Hillary Clinton's concession speech, they assembled a communications group to, if nothing else, talk about collusion between Trump and the Russians. And in some people believe now maybe this was an attempt to muddy the waters because they recognize that if people dug too deeply, they'd see there was collusion between Hillary Clinton and the Russians. But if nothing else, as we come to the end of this day on October 31st, I hope that we will remember it as Reformation Day, but of course it's also Halloween. And my commentary today reminds us that Halloween has long been known as the Festival of the Dead. The Celtic tribes and their priests, the Druids, celebrated as a marker, really as a change from life to death. November 1st at that time was their new year, and so Halloween or Samhain was kind of like a New Year's Eve. And so there were traditions that existed at that time where children would sometimes wander the countryside. They'd wear scary masks. They would carry turnips, which they would carve into jack-o'-lanterns. Later, of course, we carved pumpkins into those jack-o'-lanterns. And this was to scare off any kind of ghosts or goblins because they felt that the veil between the living and the dead was the thinnest at that time. And so you had all of those traditions that were part of Halloween. And then, of course, you have those that are part of Wicca, witchcraft, and they have also celebrated the Feast of Samhain, the first witchcraft feast of the year. And so you can see that this was an attempt in which they tried to communicate with the dead. And as Christians, we have to say, Deuteronomy 18, as well as many other passages in the Scriptures, admonish us not to be involved in divination. So if nothing else, we recognize that although there are some very important Christian roots to October 31st, not the least of which is that was All Saints' Day on November 1st. This was also a time in which you have the forces of darkness that have indeed celebrated Halloween. So again, as I say in my commentary, you only have a few choices, either to just simply ignore it or to come up with a positive alternative. Some churches have had a Fall Fun Festival, but I want to suggest to you that maybe the most positive alternative is what we've talked about today here on Point of View. All Saints' Day could also be Reformation Day, and that 500th anniversary of the Reformation going back to Martin Luther, I think is a good way to end the program. Hope you appreciated the program. If you'd like to know a little bit more, you'd like to read my commentary, you'd like to see some of the interview that we've done before or some of the articles we posted, all available at the website, pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here tomorrow on our Millennial Roundtable.
Point of View Radio has been changing lives for a generation. Listeners have been inspired to apply themselves in all kinds of ways, to stand up as lawyers defending the Constitution and freedom, to start Christian schools, training up a new generation, to launch ministries on college campuses, even to run for and serve in Congress. So again, what are you doing to make a positive change? One way to start today is to join the Truth Team, Truth Team 360, and help us change lives. Our nation needs a Truth Team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you